Hi there. Thank you very much for coming. I'm really honored and excited to be presenting to you guys our microservice deployment pipeline at Cvent. We use microservices and Couchbase extensively in our architecture throughout all our products that we build at Cvent. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go over, define a few things for you, talk about microservices, talk about what we do special at Cvent, walk you through our pipeline, and do a demo. So let's get started. First, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Cvent. At Cvent, we do online event planning as our primary business. We have a bunch of auxiliary projects that can be sold with and instead of the event, but event is really what drives us. We have 1,900 employees. We manage 1.4 million. We've managed 1.4 million events. Those are conferences, meetings, sessions. We have customers that use Cvent for basically all their meetings, and we have customers that just do big events like this. We have a 1 billion market cap, and we've got a whole bunch of users that are just growing. So that's what we do at Cvent. And Couchbase. Why do we use Couchbase at Cvent? Primarily, a lot of us have a gaming background, and we've used Couchbase in our prior jobs to manage player records. Couchbase is actually really excellent for that, and so we were familiar. And then Memcache compatibility was a really big driving force for us. We had Memcache leveraged throughout our system, and Couchbase is a really great natural progression for where you want to store your data. Becomes permanent, right? There's a backing store. You guys provide, Couchbase provides great clients. Makes it really easy for us to manage and maintain our connections to the cluster, send and receive data, do all that stuff. It's really easy to administer. I'm a developer. I came and I joined a DevOps team and said, hey, I want to do some DevOps stuff, and here you go. Here's Couchbase. So I can run and manage Couchbase, the organization. I've got a partner over there. He does a lot of the administration too, but really it's a two-guy job. It's certainly scalable if we need to be able to handle more load, add more servers. Schemaless makes it really easy for us to allow developers to just start writing code. We've got a monolithic application, traditional SQL backing store, which I'll talk about. It makes it really hard to scale development moving forward, but using Couchbase, anybody can define the data they need and just start working. And then obviously the indexing is really important to us. We've got a lot of different natures of data, and we like to have that exposed. So by allowing developers to create their own queries and do that, they can obviously leverage Couchbase. And where Couchbase fits in, caching, it's big for us. We've got a lot of standard data, airports, hotels, all this stuff, right? Throw it in Couchbase, and it's readily available. Capacity, it manages our load for us. We can keep track of counters really easy in Couchbase. Obviously, document store, key value is critical for a lot of these things. A vast majority of our data is key value. A lot of it's session data, which is really easy to take care of in Couchbase. And again, moving forward, it's becoming a primary source of truth for a lot of our data. And the relational structures make it really easy for developers to integrate. Views, yeah, sure, they're easy, but Nickel is easier, and a lot of our developers having that SQL, traditional SQL training, they can walk right in, start developing with Couchbase, and we're really starting to go up into the right a little bit with our Nickel. What we've got a lot of Couchbase at Cvent, and we've got 8 clusters. That's throughout our development, continuous integration, staging, production, and DR. We also have a couple other clusters for business purposes that have to be kept separately. We've got, this number is probably too small, 215 plus applications. Pretty much everything we build now is a new service. So when we build a new service, a lot of that obviously drives to Couchbase. 100 environments. Pretty much we call them silos, where if a developer's building a new feature, They deploy to their silo for test before it moves along. And we've got a ton of those and 45 teams, right? So we've got a lot of people driving a lot of work. So Couchbase is really helpful for that. Now let's get to microservices. What is a microservice? It's modular, it's decentralized, it's scalable, and it's got a well-defined interface, right? It's basically a simple application. You know, academically, that's what a microservice is. At Cvent, some of our microservices aren't very micro. We've got entire applications, basically. We call them microservices. They start out built like I'm going to demonstrate services, but really it's a full-blown, freestanding, pretty much application. A lot of these microservices depend on each other as well. So having this well-defined interface makes it really easy for us to have these services all talk to each other. Microservices at Cvent, right? Why do we do them? They're really easy to build. We've got pretty much a one-click creation process for our services. I'll demonstrate that for you. They're scalable. We need more. I mean, a lot of these things, especially with the Couchbase backing, they scale horizontally. We need more. We need to be able to authenticate more users quickly, scale out the authentication service, right? Certainly very testable. Throughout our process, we have built-in integration tests as well as unit tests that are all created as part of the service creation process, and then it's up to the developer, obviously, to fill them out and make them complete, but the process is all well-defined. Best practices are there for our users. And you know, they're connected, so it's easy. We have got a very standard process for service registration and validating, making sure that they're up. All that stuff is really easy to maintain compared to our traditional application, right? So, oh, I should go back a slide. So like, if you look at this picture right here, you've got a monolithic application and your user's talking to it, right? That's Cvent 1999. Oh, we needed to start scaling out and removing functionality from that monolithic application so we can actually continue to grow. Authentication, right? That's a logical place to start a service and move that functionality out. You know, and as we grow, more services, survey, whatever you've got, and you know, these just proliferate throughout our infrastructure. We've got tons. Some of them talk to each other, some of them don't, and you know, you build out basically your full infrastructure using services as well as your legacy code, and more. This was a fun slide. So what's our stack? Our stack at Cvent. We use Dropwizard, which is a framework for building services. We use Java, obviously. For our clients, it's retrofit on this Java side, and we've got refit on the C# side, our legacy stuff. A lot of it is C#. We use Jenkins for pretty much everything, which I'll walk you through. And Jenkins has an integration to Slack. So when customers do stuff in Jenkins, especially related to Couchbase, we get a notification in our Slack channel saying such and so did this action, right? So we have an accountability trail for that. Couchbase is adding more granular access control in 4.5, 4.6. So we'll see how that affects us, but this is our own mechanism we've got right now. We use Datadog for new SQL. We do use Postgres, but Couchbase is used in a vast majority of these microservices as source of truth. Again, what do we do? Java. So Dropwizard. What is Dropwizard? Dropwizard is essentially a library of libraries. It's Jetty, it's Jersey, it's Jackson. That's what you need to build a web service. Jetty is our web server, Jersey is our RESTful APIs, and Jackson does our serialization and deserialization, right? And on top of that, we have our own internal libraries. Dropwizard Common, which is a lot of functionality that we use, mostly Cvent proprietary. The authentication flow goes through Dropwizard Common. And then Dropwizard Couchbase, which is a pretty amazing thing how it worked out for us. So in days gone by, we had older clients in Java, and we built this framework around that client to facilitate querying views and stuff in a common way. When the Java client got updated to version 2, everything broke. We were really fortunate to have this library because everybody was leveraging this library. We had a common interface. You upgrade the library, and for most purposes, we didn't have 50 applications at the time all have to go update the client and make code changes, which would have taken a week, right? It took me a week and them a couple hours to do the integration. Retrofit and refit, so we've got REST clients, and by having these clients, applications have a native interface to our REST services. So it's fantastic. You basically make a method call. It does all the underlying HTTP, serialization, deserialization, all that stuff for you. Again, for Java and C#. So it makes development really, really easy. Jenkins, again, what does that do? That drives Dropkick. What is Dropkick? Dropkick is our one-click service creation. What does that do? That creates a service, takes a couple parameters. There's essentially a checkbox. Do you want to use Couchbase? It actually is, which buckets do you want to talk to? And it's a templated system based on Slush, which creates a service according to your parameters. It's just a template. But in that service, it has, like I mentioned, all the tests. The clients are templated for you, and away you go. It also, and this is sort of some of the Wizard of Oz stuff that I took out for our demo, but it also creates a repository and stash for you, so you're all set to go for development, and all our services deploy in a common way, so you're all set. View management, again, I sort of mentioned this before. When our applications need to deploy views, generally we recommend they do that ahead of deployment of the application so the views can index. Jenkins does that for us as well. So if you have access to Jenkins, you basically say, hey, where your view is and your views are in a repository. You click a button, it deploys. Nickel, that's something I'm working on now. I'll demo that as well. We haven't fully baked all our best practices, but it's fun to play with. And then obviously build and deploy. All these Jenkins jobs are all created as part of the Dropkick process for you, or they are common and shared across all services. So I talk a lot about best practices, and that's really a key to success with microservices, really important. You've got a lot of applications running. How do you maintain them? How do you make them be friends and play nicely in a common playground, right? So managed schema, we really try hard to make sure that when customers, internal customers create things, they vet what they're going to do in Couchbase so we can review that really quick for them. Again, it provide a client, the native client I mentioned. Configuration, this is really key to managing 100 services in production. How do you make your configuration manage, and how do you manage Couchbase across 100 services in case you need to maintain the cluster? And I'll explain that too. Service discovery, hopefully a lot of you guys know that. Application starts, it's registered, you go to a common repository, find out where it is, so the clients basically don't need to actually have that connection. So it's self-maintaining. Utility, I don't remember what I wrote for that. And enforcement, how do we enforce our best practice? And again, that all rolls back into the Jenkins jobs that deploy the views. All right, Couchbase best practices. 1 thread per bucket, right? If you have a bucket, that's using a thread. How many cores do you have on your boxes? 16, 32. You have 10 buckets, that's 10 threads. There's 1 thread per design doc. How many design docs? You got 10 for that bucket? Well, you're running out of threads, right? So what do we do to resolve that? We share our buckets. We pretty much have 2 buckets that nearly all of our services use. We call them Transient 1. Transient 1 is a bucket full of data that we need, but we don't have to have for our business purposes. Things like sessions. The rules on Transient 1 are no views, no indexing, right? So if you're going in there, and your data has to TTL. The whole idea of that bucket is the data is important. It's got 1 replica, done. And then the other bucket is data 1. And what's in data 1? That's all the domain objects, important customer state, things like that. It has 3 replicas. You can use views and you can use indexes. And in order to facilitate being able to have all your services in the same bucket, we need to namespace everything. How do we do that? All our document prefixes, all our document IDs have prefixes. The environment, dev, CI, staging, production. then the name of the application, in this case events, then the name of the action in what's going on in the event. Well, that's our wizard, how you create an event, and it's basically the process flow. And then the unique identifier. And then, as I mentioned, you choose your bucket based on the identifier. Oh, and I mentioned there's already a thread per design doc, so that's the indexing best practices. Indexes should leverage the document prefixes. That's really important, the view indexes, to make sure that they only index the relevant data. How do we do that? We split the key, right? And here's a sample of basically we split the key into its important parts. If the application is the specified application, and if the object type, the entity, is of the type that's desired for the index, then we can do the omit, right? We try to deploy indexes. This is more nickel together to prevent scans. I'll explain that. And when we deploy to production, indexes aren't replicated. So our Jenkins jobs deploy to disaster recovery, our disaster recovery cluster at the same time. All right, configuration. This here is what I'm really excited about and how I figured out how to manage Couchbase across all these services. We use a VIP, not recommended by Couchbase, but they approved it for our support, approved it for the way we described. We have a VIP, and it basically points to all the nodes, all the data nodes in the cluster, and we maintain that. And it's important to use port 8091, 8092, and 11210. And what happens is when the client traditionally connects to the cluster, it'll connect to the cluster, get back the cluster map, and then connect to the rest of the nodes. When we use the VIP, the client connects to the VIP, and the VIP, load balances the nodes in the cluster, picks a node, and it gets back the cluster map, feeds it back to the client. And then the client has that same information and connects to all three nodes in this case, 3 nodes in the cluster, right? And then once you're connected to the cluster, VIP doesn't matter anymore. So in all our configurations, we provide the VIP, not the nodes in the cluster. And this was critical when we replaced all the hardware in our cluster. Because as you go through that cluster maintenance, all your applications will remain connected. But as soon as you restart them, if that cluster's gone, you're in trouble. But now they connect to the VIP. The VIP's got the new cluster information. Everybody's happy. That's the secret sauce. All right, and let's go through deployment, right? And this is a standard microservice deployment time. You do your dev. You commit your changes. Jenkins usually will detect it. It will build. It'll deploy to CI and run your integration test, right? Oh, there it goes. It's running the tests. Then it does the same thing. It builds and deploys to alpha, runs the test. And then staging, it'll build and deploy, run the test. And then you go to production. Now, obviously, there's manual intervention there. We don't want to auto-deploy to production. And then, obviously, the cycle starts again. And now here, I'm going to show you how quick and easy it is to build a service, right? So I'm going to go to, that didn't come up. Where's my, let's try that. There we go. So I'm going to go to Jenkins, right? And we've got a folder dropkick and a project dropkick. I'm going to build it, right? What do we need to know? I'm going to build a service. We also have libraries, right? But I'm going to build a service today, and we're going to call it Connect. And this is a Couchbase Connect 2016 demo. This is an optional field. The bucket, we're going to use the data1 bucket. Contact email, well, that's me, human@cvent.com. And then here's the Wizard of Oz stuff I was talking about, right? Instead of the output file path here is, this is the path generated that it'll be moved to. This is a spoof since we normally push the path. We push this to stash, right? So we're not doing that. So it's going to build the project, right? And we can watch that. Oh, it's copying some stuff over. This is Wizard of Oz stuff too. Let's give it a second. Come on. Any questions while we wait for this? Oh, here it goes. But any questions? 8091, 8092, and 11210. if I recall correctly, 11210 was needed for the C clients, which we have a few projects based on Node that leverage that. Okay, so we've created this project, right? So now we're going to go to the terminal, and can I make this bigger? There we go. Right, and I'm going to go to my documents folder, Couchbase Connect 2016, projects, and Connect, right? And if we look here, you'll see that we've got the .NET client, we've got an API, which is basically the entities, you've got integration test, we've got a Java client, and we have the service. So we have to build this locally because under the covers, we use JSON schema for our entities right now, so they have to be pre-built. So I'm going to build them. So I just do a Maven package, right? And this is actually going to build and run all the tests in the project. And while that's going on, I'm going to bring up IntelliJ so we can load the project and run it. And I'll show you what's going on in the project. Oh, another time for any questions. Yes?
Why a VIP rather than doing a DNS service through like console?
That's what we use at Cvent, and it works well.
Okay.
So if you use console, again, it needs to be maintained. You'll have to maintain the state of each node in the cluster, but it probably would work very similarly.
That's what HashiCorp console's for, is you just push it tracks all the services.
Okay. All right, so here we go. We have, this is my real job. So we're going to create a new project from existing source, right? And this is in documents, Couchbase Connect, projects, connect, and then the pom.xml. We're going to search for recursive. We're going to keep the project with the project. We're going to import Maven. And these don't detect automatically, these entities, so we're going to pull them in. So next, 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 next. And we're going to do it in this window, because this is now my real work. So if I flip back, you'll see that the service built successfully, so we don't need this terminal anymore. And view. Can you read that well enough, or is that too small? There's present. Oh, here, that's why. View, enter presentation mode. Now to make it bigger, and I want the project, right? So as I mentioned, here's all the aspects. The one that we're going to really drive into is the service. And we go and take a look at Connect and the resources, right? So we've created, and here's a little bit of the secret sauce too of Wizard of Oz things, that this is basically a REST endpoint. I cheated a little bit, right? And all it does is it's going to get and set this particular entity. We have a notion of a key helper in Drop Wizard Couchbase, which basically formats, if you basically give it an ID, say 4, right, it'll automatically append the best practices for the application, right? So we're going to run this, edit configuration, new, connect. I'm going to make this visible for me, so let me exit this presentation mode so that way I can see what I'm clicking on. Edit configuration. Oops, yeah. Application, so we're obviously it's connect. Automatically filled. This is the main class. The VM option, the arguments are server, and then we need to provide the configuration. So it's configs, and then this is dev.yaml. And the working directory is got to be the service. And we want to use our own class path, right? And run. and then we'll wait for the service to come up. And oh, let me bring up Couchbase too. So Firefox. Right, so I've got my local empty Couchbase. You go away. Data buckets, right? We got data one node, and it's empty, right? So let's go to our service and make a request, right? So go to Paul, localhost 8088 is the thing. Connect/v1, that's the versioning on our API. Connect, and here's the endpoint, and we're going to say flibbertigibbet, right? And the document is not found. So we're going to go and change this to a post, right? And we're going to give it some content, right? So text, here's the demo, and then and we can put any other kind of data that we want, right? We have Drop Wizard Couchbase, and Jackson will automatically treat additional parameters, things that it doesn't know, and retain them for you in a separate map. So we can put whatever we want in here, and the entity is extensible. This helps with versioning forward, so if you, and backwards as well, right, to maintain compatibility. Some data nobody knows about, and comma, more, and then 7, right? And then we're going to say that's JSON, and we're going to post it, right? And it got created, and then obviously if we flip back to, if we post it again, it's conflicted, and now if we do a get, the data is there, right? Here's the data. There's our data. And that's pretty much how our services work. And then we can go back to Couchbase, right? And oh, we've got an item, and of course, oh, data buckets, documents. Here's our document, right? So, I mean, it's that easy to set up, run, and start, test, whatever web service. So that's it. Okay, so now for Jenkins, what do? We back up our data. So if a customer is upgrading their application, they can back up their data out of the bucket without requiring any help. They can copy and transform data. We have a job to manage that for them. That was really helpful when we went to multi-tenancy to share services. So if we had one service that developers were using, right, they didn't need to stand up every service instance in all those siloed regions that I talked about. They can just talk to a common staging instance that will support them unless actual development on that particular server was going on. They can delete documents, manage views, and manage GSI, right? So this is a list of all the Jenkins jobs that we have in production. Some fail sometimes, right? And I'll show you really quick how we do that as well. So we go back to Jenkins, right, and drop kick, Jenkins, right? So here's all our Couchbase jobs. These are the ones I set up for this demo. Update design doc. What this basically does is it queries for a directory where the design doc is in stash. Again, this is all local. And it'll pull in those files. It will read in all the design doc data, do a comparison. So if something didn't change, it won't do anything, but it won't fail if it's the same. It'll enforce our best practices on versioning of views. So if you make an application change, you want to make a view change and maintain the state of both views until the deployment is completed, and then clean up the old view. So basically here, if I go back to the terminal, right, you can see that 2016 views, right? If we look at this view, it's a simple view, just basically queries the app name, right? Not really all our best practices, but simple enough for this demo. And we build this, right? And we look and see what happens. It basically, as I mentioned, it queries Couchbase for all the views. It says it didn't find it, so we're going to deploy the view, right? So if I rebuild this, it's going to say already there. See, the view already exists as specified. I'm doing nothing, but that's still a successful view. We can go to Couchbase, right, and we can look at the view that we just created, and we can show it. And if I did it right, it should show the document that we have, but I didn't, sorry. The app name should be Connect. Let's take a real quick look at the data. Oh, it's Connect service. So that's why this view didn't work. So if I go back really quick, right, and I update this view, right? Oh, actually, this is an opportunity to sort of show you another Jenkins job. So we can allow people to deploy views as text. This is a lot for like if we need to go and find data. You can deploy a text view, right? So build with parameters. The design doc name is going to be I messed up, right? And the view name is check or connect dot get data, and then paste that there. No reduce function, we do a version check, we're going to build, right? It should deploy. It was successful. We go back to Couchbase. Data one, go back to views. We got 2 views now. And, oh, I got to hurry up. Right, so if we show this view now, hopefully the data's there. And there it is, yay. So that's how we do it with views. We can also do the same thing with nickel indexes, right? We'll deploy the index. And when you deploy nickel indexes, we take them all out of the specified file, which I'll run this really quick. And we add defer build. What that does is it allows us to defer the indexer so it can build, if we're uploading 5 indexes at the same time, instead of starting the indexer and creating 5 threads, it will create 1 thread and index all of them at the same time. So that's a big help. And console output, so yeah, it built the index. So monitoring, we use service discovery, right? So service discovery monitor /OK. By default, that always returns 200. Developers could say, oh, if its Couchbase's connection is not working or there are so many failures in the past amount of time, it could return other things. We have a Datadog dashboard, which we use to monitor things, and we also alert. I'll show you that because that's pretty cool. We have Datadog alerts, so if there are too many connections going on to Couchbase, we certainly need to know that, oh, somebody's deploying things and oh, it's behaving as not expected. We need to be prepared. Couchbase alerts, it will send us emails automatically, and we use Datadog to monitor things like those version views I talked about. Generally, you only want to have 2 at a time, right? You want to have the old one and deploy the new one, and as soon as you deploy the application, somebody should go back and delete the first one, right? So if that count ever reaches 3, we want to know. We have an alert on that. So here's the cluster health of our production node a month ago when I created this demo. And you can see that the cluster connections are at 16,000, and that's yellow. It's an arbitrary number, but obviously we want to make sure that it doesn't go red. But we're keeping an eye on that. The ones at the bottom are really interesting. It's queue size and queue age. We had some failing hardware where our queue sizes were getting ridiculously large, and the time that items would remain in queue to be written to disk was like 60 seconds. We knew we had a problem. And how did we find it? We found it with this graph. So it was really helpful. Couchbase support was really helpful, actually, in getting us fixed with our failed hardware. And then, since I talked about the VIP and how we were going to maintain it, the process is you remove a node from the VIP. That way, the VIP will connect to the nodes will guarantee to connect to one of the nodes that will persist after the node is removed from the cluster. Again, existing applications are connected already. We then perform the maintenance on that node, remove it, fix it, add it back, and then the node gets added back into the VIP. So when we replaced all the hardware, we basically went through this for each pair that we removed, did swap rebalances, and then we were on a whole new cluster, transparently to all our applications. And then it's our goal here. Wow, I really cruised through after it's my goal to get all this stuff open source. So if you guys are interested in it, like I could take that as feedback back to my management, so I can say, hey, hey, let's do this, right? There's obviously some work involved for us to do that, but it'd be great if we could build a community around this work. So thank you. I finished a little early, so if you guys got questions, I'll be happy to take them. All right. Oh, yes.
Can you talk about the Jenkins job that might create a new service for deploying it? How does that all work?
How does that all work? That's Jenkins, automatically detects that there's a change. Like if you commit a change, right?
When you create the new repository, it sets up a new one.
Oh, sure. So we have right. It creates a new repository. It's an incubator, but your repository is named, right? And then when you go to deploy a job, you just enter that name, and Jenkins will go look up in Stash, find that repository, and deploy that. Any other questions? Yes?
How do you control people's access to Jenkins?
So Jenkins has its own authentication. So we have LDAP rolled out throughout our organization, and in order to go into Jenkins, you have to log in, right? So then when you, say for example, somebody deploys a view or deletes something, that's usually more concerning that we should be aware of. When that job completes successfully, it knows who did it, right? Because they logged in, when they did it, and what they did. And it will log all the parameters basically from the Jenkins job get logged and sent to our Couchbase Slack channel.
So you can integrate with all that.
Yes. Yeah, Jenkins is, however you want to set up your own authentication scheme, that's Jenkins, and yes. And so I get permissions, I have the ability to do that.
And the Jenkins job you demoed mainly is for creating the project. It did not really build the project, deploy, or testing the project.
Correct. So the Jenkins job that creates the microservice basically creates a template. It leverages a template, fills it out based on the parameters you provide in that form, and it will set it up, right? So we know that it will work because our template is well tested and all that stuff, but it's not really a service, right? It's just getting set entity. So it's up to the developer to provide all the business logic. At some point, you have to start somewhere. We just make it really easy for our developers to create a service. We had a lot of C# developers, obviously, from our legacy, and we were all moving forward with a lot of Java, right? So we wanted to lower the barrier of entry for our developers to be able to contribute quickly.
So if a developer can log in Jenkins to create a project, how do you control, I guess, for example, if you want to create view, delete view for the Couchbase,
Yes.
usually we do not want to.
You're right. We trust our developers, right? When it goes to deploying and things like that, yeah. I mean, you're right that you want to keep that list small, and our list of people who can use Jenkins is smaller than all developers. But fundamentally, you're right. We trust our developers. Any other questions? Yes, I can't see you. Oh, I need to remember to re-ask the questions. I'm sorry. Yes?
What is that, Paul, PEW? PEW, is that like?
Oh, Paw? Yes, Paw is just a REST tool. You can buy it. It's an Apple, it's an app store. What is Paw? Paw is a REST client. It's like Postman. Postman is another really good one that's free. Paw makes it really easy to demo things like this, super quick. But for a lot of my test, when I create tests and you can group them and you can have environments, I really recommend Postman for REST testing, like local RESTful testing. It's fantastic. Postman. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you very much. I'll be up here if you have any questions. If anybody is interested in our framework, I'd love to get your information so we can try and get this evangelized further.